Folks, this is JC one more time. I just sort of stumbled onto a little story here. Of course, it's been here all this time, and I knew it was there, but I was going over my Jim's journal, my life story, and I came across an episode that was the first day of my many travels on a freight train to Odessa, Texas, and back from Modesto, California, my hometown, where my mother and my sisters and I lived, and sometimes my brother and my stepchildren and all kinds of people lived there from one time to another, but it sort of was my hometown of Modesto on the east side in Little Okie. So I'm going to be reading off of the screen. Rather than try to tell this, it's easier to read it, and that way I don't ramble quite as bad. I still ramble some, but not nearly as bad. So anyhow, without further ado, we'll start, and I'm going to put this camera down out of the way so I can see the screen. And I'll start reading it out. When I was 13 years old, I was in the 9th grade. I attended Modesto High School. Now, 13 doesn't seem very old to be in the 9th grade, but I was very fortunate in Merced years earlier to start in the 1st grade at age 4. So in my class, I was always 1 year younger than anybody else in the class. And so that's why I was 13 years old in the 9th grade. And I attended Modesto High School, which was on the other side of town from where we lived. To get there, I rode a bus that stopped at the Canal bus stop 2 blocks from our house. One day in September, I started late and I missed the bus. I had 65 cents for lunch, and I wore a pair of Levi's, a shirt, a Levi jacket, and of course shoes and socks, and of course underwear. Because I missed the bus, it was necessary to walk to school, so I started walking. Now, to get to school, I had to walk all the way across town. School was over on the west side of Modesto, way over there. It was several miles anyhow. And but I knew I had to do it. I'd be late, but I guess as long as I showed up, that was the main thing. Now, to get across town, I had to cross the railroad track switch station. And as I was crossing the railroad tracks, a train began slowly pulling out of Modesto toward the south. It was a steam engine, and it pulled 30 or so cars. I don't remember the number of the engine, but I do recall the number contained the numeral 9, like engine number 9. Okay, all of a sudden the thought flashed through my mind that I hadn't seen my dad in a long time, since the last time I was in Odessa, Texas, and my brother, Thomas, I call him Buddy, and my sister Shike, her name is Eva, we call her Shike, that's pet name, we're also in Odessa. And that thought started me on the greatest adventure of my young life, and it proved to me beyond any doubt that I surely had an angel watching over me every second. Believe me, I did. It's impossible to say for sure exactly what thought ran through my mind at that time, at that instant. What thought or desire or some other inner force caused me to start this long journey that I started on that day. I don't remember a specific instant when I actually decided, quote unquote, to go. I can't recall a decision being made. One minute I was walking to school, and the next minute I was on a train headed out of town, headed for Texas. I wasn't apprehensive or nervous, oddly enough. I was just going to Texas. I never considered what I was doing to be wrong. As a fact, I never considered anything at all about it. It just happened. It never occurred to me that anyone would worry. I just didn't think about it. It wasn't in my nature. I hope you can bear with me in my repeated attempts to rationalize and justify my actions as a child and then as a young man. As I look back on things that happened to me, and that the seeming lack of emotion by me and my responses to those things, I continue to be amazed at what seems to be an absence of any concern for either myself or anyone else who may have been affected by my actions. It makes me wonder if all people at some time in their lives or at an age also experience actions without concern or emotion. I think that might be the case more often than not. If so, that would explain a lot, at least to me, of why certain people seem to be so different from what I expect them to be. Anyhow, to go on with my trip, I got in a boxcar and I settled back out of sight at first. As soon as the sound of the train wheels began the clickety-clack of the railroad track, as Hank Snow would say in his song, One More Ride, I knew I was on my way. The sound was hypnotic, and I can still remember it today as the sound that encouraged my progress. Later I would observe that it is only by the grace of God that I didn't become a real full-time hobo. And of course, my mother's strong will, she helped too. When the train cleared the city limits and I thought it was safe to come out, I moved to the door to watch the countryside pass by. It was invigorating to feel the earth move by and feel the train propel me forward to my destination. I never wondered if I had made a mistake in going or if I should maybe go back home. The only thing on my mind was Texas. Well, I reached Merced, where the train stopped to switch a few cars. That was 37 miles south of Modesto. I stayed in the car. I was in until the switch engine had done its job. It took a half hour or so. The same thing happened at Fresno, and then we were on our way to Bakersfield. At Bakersfield, it took quite a bit longer to rearrange the train. So I got off the train and I hung around the yard waiting for everything to be hooked and unhooked, and the train engine began unhooking, and I began to wonder if this was as far as the train would go. It was getting dark, and I was standing at the edge of the train yard when a big man started walking toward me. At first, I thought he might be a railroad man, but when he got closer, I could see he wasn't. He said hello, and I answered him with my own hello. He asked me who I was and where I was going, and I told him I was James, and I was going to Odessa, Texas to see my dad. He told me his name was Blackie. I asked him what was happening here with the train, and he explained to me that because the train was so long and the hill between Bakersfield was so long and steep, it had to be hooked to 4 diesel engines in order to make it over the hill. He told me it would take another hour or so, and he asked what I intended to do, and I said I guessed I would get back into the boxcar where I had been. Blackie said that might not be a good idea since it got very cold on the mountain at night. He'd show me what to do. Blackie was quite a person. He did more things for me and taught me more than I can ever tell on this, but I'll go on. Blackie became my friend and my source of information on our trip from Bakersfield to Los Angeles and then on to Colton. Blackie said the most important thing was to stay warm and safe, and that he would show me how. He told me to find boxcars that had heavy paper lining the walls and to strip off as much of it as I could and bring it back to him. While I was doing this, Blackie found a reefer car that was empty, a refrigerator car that was empty. The refrigerator cars of those days were well-insulated boxcars that had compartments in each end where ice was dumped to cool the produce in the cars. There was a lid at the top which was open to accept the ice and then closed and latched with a strong steel handle. Well, we climbed to the top of the car, and Blackie told me to take the paper down into the ice compartment and spread it in several layers on the floor. This was to lie on to keep the cold from coming up onto us from the bottom. Then we would use a couple of sheets of paper to cover us. He said he had one more thing to get, and he left. He soon came back with a long, very strong piece of wire. After we arranged the paper on the bottom, Blackie pulled the latch down and closed the hatch door, on top of the latch. And then he wired the door shut so it couldn't be opened. So the latch couldn't be pulled up and the door couldn't be opened. The floor and inside walls of the ice compartment were made of strong, thick slats. He wired the hatch door with one end of the wire and tied the other end of the wire to a slat in the wall. Now the door couldn't be opened from the outside, and there was no danger of ice being dumped in on us. We covered up with paper, and our body heat kept us warm. As soon as the train started back up, I went to sleep, and I slept warmly all the way to Los Angeles. It was a lot more than I expected. It was just breaking daylight when we pulled into the Los Angeles yard. Blackie woke me, and he opened the hatch and told me to come up on top, up to the top and get ready to get off the train. He said the train would break up here, and for this leg of the journey, it was the end of the line. So we got off at the edge of the train yard, and we began walking along the tracks. We soon came to a place where there were a half a dozen or so other men with campfires going. This was the first time I had seen a hobo jungle. We walked up to a fire, and the men there said hello, and we answered them with our own hellos. It was cool, and we warmed ourselves at the fires. One of the men asked me how old I was, and I told him I was 13. He said that was pretty young to be out on the road. Blackie told him that I was with him, and that I was going to Texas, and that seemed to satisfy the fellow. A couple of the men had cans of water heating with vegetables in them. Whatever it was sure smelled good. Blackie asked if I was hungry, and I said yes, I was. One of the men said this wasn't ready to eat yet, and Blackie said we needed some bread, and he told me that I was the best one to get it. He said because I was young and new to the area that I could probably get more than the others. Then he told me there was a bakery on the other side of the Los Angeles River. Now the Los Angeles River looks like a giant canal, and there's very seldom much water in it except in the rainy season. There's a lot of other things in it, garbage and trash that's dumped off in there, but for the most part, for the most time, it's just an empty, large canal with just a little bit of water running down the center. Anyhow, we were camped alongside the Los Angeles River, which was a canal. He told me to walk along the river until I came to an overcrossing, go over the walkway to the other side, and come back this way until I saw a bakery on the left. At the rear of the bakery, I could get day-old bread just for the asking. Well, I followed his instructions, and I found the bakery. The aroma of the bakery was very strong and pleasant, and it reminded me just how hungry I was, since I hadn't eaten since leaving home the day before. When I found the bakery, I knocked on the back door, and a woman answered it. She had on a baker's hat and a white apron. She looked just like I pictured a baker should look. She said good morning to me and asked what I wanted. She was very pleasant. I thought she would ask how old I was. Almost everyone else did, but she didn't ask. I told her I had heard I could get day-old bread there, and she asked what kind I wanted, and I told her all kinds. She left and closed the door and was gone for a couple of minutes. Then the door opened, and she handed me 2 large paper grocery bags filled with loaves of white and brown bread and rolls and muffins. Well, I thanked her very much, and I left. When I got back to the camp, the men were waiting, and they came out to meet me. They took the bag of bread to the campfire, and one of them said it was a bonanza. They were excited about how much bread I had. Blackie wasn't there, and I asked where he was. One of the men said he had gone to town to snipe cigarette butts. Well, he had left right after I left. A few minutes later he returned. It was full daylight by now. Blackie told me that since no one had money most of the time, in order to have something to smoke, they had to go places where people congregate, like a bus station or a train station or a movie theater, and look for partly smoked cigarettes, which they call cigarette butts. He had a shirt pocket full of cigarette butts, and he passed them around. Just about everyone smoked. I noticed that they tore off the burnt end of the butts and lit the other end. If the butts had filters, the filters were torn off, and the burnt end was lit. I had a couple of Lucky Strike cigarettes left in my pocket, and I smoked one of them, and I gave the last one to Blackie. Both of our cigarettes were passed around from one person to another. You shared everything in these hobo jungles. By now the stew was ready to eat, and the rest of the hobos came to where we were. It was understood that anyone who was hungry could eat whatever was available. There were 6 or 7 men, and some of them had cans to use as dishes and had spoons. I was given a can and a spoon, and we ate soup and bread, and it was absolutely delicious. I was about starved. Well, we hung around the train yard the rest of the day until late that evening. Then Blackie said we had to get ready to hop a freight to Colton. He said that would be my next stop before heading for Texas. As it grew dark, we found the train making up for the east. This was still the Southern Pacific train. I would ride it to Colton, where there was a switching yard, and then go south to Yuma, Arizona, and catch a freight train east to El Paso, Texas. And this concludes the first leg, my first leg of my trip from Modesto, California to Odessa, Texas, via the freight train route when I was 13 years old in 1949. I hope you enjoyed it, and the rest is another story. So thank you very much. This is JC.